Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we will be learning today Emir Hashem Daf Zayin Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn the very interesting halachos of Nesias Kapayim, the halachos of duchening. Personally, I'm finding this to be a very, very fascinating limud. You know, as Yisraelim, we don't necessarily know so much about what goes on by the duchening and the reasonings behind them. So I'm finding this to be a very enjoyable, fascinating limud. We pick up today last word on Vav Amid Beis, Siman Kuf Chav Ches Sif Chav Vav. Many of you might be wondering, by duchening, if you take a look in your siddur or in your machzer, you'll see that next to the words of Birchas Kohanim, Yivarecha Hashem, V'yishmerecha, etc., etc., in the siddur, there are psukim that are printed by each word. So, for example, by Yivarecha, it says here, Yivarecha Hashem mitzion oisei shamayim va'aretz. Hashem Adeineinu ma'adir shimcha b'chal haaretz. V'yishmerecha shamreini kel ki chasisi bach. So for each one of the words of Birchas Kohanim, there's a pasuk attached to that word. What's at play over here? What's going on with these psukim? So let's take a look here and see what the halacha says. Says the Mechaber Sif Chafav, B'shah shemivarchin, at the time that the Kohanim are reciting the brachas of Birchas Kohanim, ein loymar shum pasuk. You should not say, the recipients of the brachas, the non-Kohanim that are listening to Birchas Kohanim, ein loymar shum pasuk. They should not recite any psukim. Ella, rather, yishtiku, they should be silent, v'yechavnu lebracha, and they should pay attention, and they should have in mind to receive the bracha, to listen to the brachas. Says the Ramah Hagah, umikal makayim, nevertheless, achshav she'akohanim ma'arichin harbe b'nigunim, the Ramah says that at least in his days, he says nowadays that the Kohanim are ma'arich, the Kohanim take a long time singing. During the singing, they say psukim. I guess what the Ramah is saying, that back in his day, it wasn't the way we have it now, where the Chazan says, Yivarechecha, and the Kohanim respond right away, Yivarechecha. It must be that there was a time delay over there, where either the Chazan said Yivarechecha, and then the Kohanim sang, and then they said Yivarechecha. Or maybe the Chazan said Yivarechecha, the Kohen said Yivarechecha, and then there was a delay until the Chazan said the next word. But somehow there was some kind of a delay over there that was taken up by the Kohanim singing. And the Ramah says that at that point, theoretically, you could say these psukim, because at that point there's nothing to be mechavein. The Kohanim aren't saying the words of Birchas Kohanim, there's just singing going on. So if you want to say the psukim, say the psukim. In other words, it's not a question of a hefsek. We're not dealing with a question of a hefsik over here, that somehow if you say the psukim, you're being mafsik. What are you being mafsik in? You're just listening. You're listening to Chazar Sashatz. So if you're saying psukim of shirais v'sishpachais, it's not a question of a hefsik. Question is, it's detracting from Birchas Kohanim. You're supposed to have kavana on Birchas Kohanim, and instead you're saying psukim. That's the problem. But if you could do it when they're singing, so the Ramah says that really you could do. Nagu gam ken learn psukim. U'kemoishen ispar le'el siman nun zayin sif aleph le'inyan baruchu. The Ramah compares this to a halacha that we learned earlier in Siman Nun Zayin, where if you look at your siddur, next to Baruchu, before Birchas Kriyashma, in many, many Siddurim, there's a little paragraph over there, Yisparach v'yishtabach. And it says over there, Nagu b'ktsas b'kaimai, some people have the minig to say this tefillah while the Chazan is saying Baruchu. And the Ramah said over there, you can't say it while the Chazan is saying Baruchu, you have to be mechavin, you have to be listening to the Chazan. And he says Baruch Hu, and then you respond with Baruch Hashem HaMavarech L'Olam V'Oed. So when are you supposed to say this Yisparach v'Yishtabach? So the Ramah said, theoretically, you could say it if the Chazan is busy singing. If the Chazan has a whole nusach over there, and it takes 5 minutes to get Baruch Hu out of his mouth, so then you could say Yisparach v'Yishtabach theoretically over there. So the Ramah said, however, at the end of the day, says the Ramah, Ach yoiser tov shaloi la'amram. The Ramah says on his own, it says here in parentheses, divrei atzmai. This is the Ramah's own words, it's his opinion, The Ramah says it is better not to recite those psukim at all. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah here. Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Kuf Beis, Ein Loimar. And the Chavetz Chaim, this is really a direct quote from the Gemara. I'm surprised that it doesn't have a parentheses over here citing the source in the Gemara. There's a question brought down in the Gemara. Is it appropriate to say psukim, or is it not appropriate to say psukim? The Mechaber Paskins over here, this is all based on a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah on Mem Amud Aleph, right? It should be Rosh Hashanah. No, I'm sorry, Saita, I'm sorry. Gemara in Saita Mem Amud Aleph, where over here the Mechaber Paskins, and he says that you should not say the psukim. So the Chavetz Chaim says, what's the rationale of the opinion not to say the psukim? I'm sorry. Not to say the psukim. The klum yesh eved shemavarchan oisai ve'enoi mazin. Is there such a thing as an eved, a servant, who's receiving a bracha from his master, and he's carrying on a conversation while his master is giving him a bracha? So you're receiving a bracha. Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. And what, you're not paying attention? Instead, you're saying, Hashem adeneinu ma'adishimcha b'chal haaretz. So you're not paying attention to the bracha that you're being given. Imagine that in your mind. There's an eved, right? There's a melech. The melech is sitting on his throne, and the melech is giving a bracha to his loyal servant who's standing in front of him. And while the melech is giving this guy a bracha, he's on his phone, he's talking to somebody. Obviously, that would be completely inappropriate. So that's what the Chavetz Chaim says here. You can't be busy saying psukim in middle of Birchas Kohanim, even though it's praise to the Rabbeinu Shalom. But so what? You're in the middle of receiving a bracha. Listen to the bracha. The klum yesh evet shemavarchan oisai ve'enoi mazin. Eis Katan Kuf Gimel Shaloy Amram. The Ramah concluded that it is better not to say them. V'chein kasvu ha'achrayim d'chein ikar, and so too the achrayim write that this is the main opinion, that we should not be reciting those psukim. The kasvu Magen Avram v'Ataz, the Magen Avram and the Taz write, the ha'imrin, those who do say these psukim, yoymar b'shosh shliat tzibbur makri l'ftei kohanim. If somebody is going to say those psukim, they should make sure to say the psukim while the chazan is saying the words of Birchas Kohanim. So you want to say Hashem adeneinu ma'adishimcha b'chal haaretz, you say it while the chazan is saying Hashem, not while the Kohen is saying Hashem. When the Kohen is saying Hashem, you need to be listening to the Kohanim. And the Eliyah Rabbah doesn't like that either. The Eliyah Rabbah says, no, you shouldn't say the psukim even when the chazan is saying the words of Birchas Kohanim. And the Chavetz Chaim brings down from the Ma'aseh Rav that the Gra set the minig in place that these brachas should not be recited. Certainly, certainly, if someone is going to say the psukim, he should not say them out loud. Like the Chavetz Chaim says in his day, a lot of people would say the psukim out loud. And not only that, he says, but there were non-Kohanim listening to the Birchas Kohanim, who not only they would say the psukim, they would say the words of Birchas Kohanim also. They would say, Yivarechecha Hashem, v'zeu tos, it's a tos. Such a minig is not brought down anywhere, and this is all a quote from the Eliyah Rabbah. We now move to Sif Chav Zayin, 3 lines down. 3 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch says the Mechaber. Kohen einoi rashoy lahoisif midaitoi yoser ala shloisha psukim shel Birchas Kohanim. The Kohen has no right to add on to the Birchas Kohanim anything other than the 3 psukim of Birchas Kohanim. It says in the Torah Kedosha, Koi sevarachu es b'nei Yisrael. So you should bless the B'nai Yisrael, meaning the exact matbeya, the exact stamp, the exact format that I gave you here in the Torah. 3 psukim. Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, Yair Hashem panav elecha v'chuneka, Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. That is Birchas Kohanim, and the Kohen has no right to add anything else on to Birchas Kohanim from his own mind. V'im hoisif, and if he does add, over al Baal Tosef, then he is over the loisasei daraisa of Baal Tosef, of adding on to one of the mitzvahs of the Torah. This would be like putting 5 parshas in tefillin, or taking 5 minim besides the lulav eser kadasim and aravos, you want to, add on a branch from an apple tree. That's Baal Tosef. So too over here, if the Kohen goes and he starts adding in other psukim into Birchas Kohanim, or other brachas into Birchas Kohanim, that's Baal Tosef. He has no right to do that. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Kuf Daled. Kohen Eina Rashay Lashon HaGemara. This is based on the Gemara Rosh Hashanah Chav Chesav Beis, and this is a direct quote from the Gemara. Shalo Yoimar, the Kohen should not say, Hayil v'nosna Torah rishus levarich, since the Torah HaKadosh gave me, the Kohen, permission to bench the Bnei Israel, Oisif bracha akas mishali, I'll add on another bracha of my own. Now, very interesting what you're going to see over here in the Mishnah Berurah. Again, this is a quote from the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. Forget the Kohen adding on his own bracha. Like, for example, let's say the Kohen would say, Yevarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. You should have mamish Yiddish anakas from the kinder. You should have gesund and parnasa, and I'll sting mamish. You should have mamish a wonderful life. So now, the Kohen is literally adding his own brachas into Birchas Kohanim. Says the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, not only that, the Kohen shouldn't say, Hayil v'nos the Torah rishus levarech, since the Torah HaKadosh gave me rishus to bench Klal Yisrael, Oisif bracha achas mishali, I'm going to add on another bracha of my own, Kigoyin, for example, another pasuk of bracha. Kigoyin, Hashem Elokei Avosechem, Yosef Aleichem Kachem Elef Pa'amim. This was a bracha that Moshe Rabbeinu gave Klal Yisrael. This is a pasuk in Parshas Dvarim. So the Gemara is telling you, not only the Kohen shouldn't make up his own brachas, the Kohen is not allowed to pull another bracha from the Torah and add in another pasuk of bracha from the Torah into Birchas Kohanim. That's also Baal Tosef. How do we know? Talmud Loimar Lo Soisifu, because we have an Issa Daraisa of Lo Soisifu. You're not allowed to add on to the mitzvahs of the Torah. Umasik Shama Gemara, and the Gemara concludes over there, Dafilu Kvar Siem Kol Birchaisav. Even if the Kohen finished Birchas Kohanim, Yivarech Hashem Yishmarecha, Yar Hashem Panav Elech V'Chuneka, Yisa Hashem Panav Elecha, V'Yaseh L'cha Shalom. Everybody says Amen. Birchas Kohanim is over. And now he says, Yosef Hashem Aleichem Kachem Elef Pa'amim. Right? So he's adding on another bracha after he already completed Birchas Kohanim. You might think that that's not Baal Tosef. How's that Baal Tosef? I did Birchas Kohanim. I was Yotzei the mitzvah Birchas Kohanim. I accomplished Birchas Kohanim. That deal is closed. Now I say, Yosef Hashem Aleichem Kachem Elef Pa'amim. This is a new thing. I'm extending. I'm adding on brachas now. But I'm not really adding it on to Birchas Kohanim. I finished Birchas Kohanim. No, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says that even if you add on to the end, that's also the Isser of Baal Tosef. Certainly if you add it on in the middle of the brachas, certainly that's a problem. Now, in the Dirshu footnote over here, Dirshu footnote 104, he says over here, if the Kohen gives another bracha, but he doesn't do it immediately after Birchas Kohanim, 5 minutes later he gives another bracha, and I'll give you a very practical example of that. The Kohen goes up to the Duchen, they do Birchas Kohanim. Okay, after the end, after Kaddish, they come down off the Duchen, and now they start walking around the shul, and people come over and say, Shkoyach Kohen, and he says, Baruch Tiyeh. So the Kohen is giving another bracha. Is that a problem of Baal Tosef? No, because it's not right next to Birchas Kohanim. It's not immediately following Birchas Kohanim. It's not in the middle of Birchas Kohanim. That's mamish after Birchas Kohanim is done, delivered, finished, absolutely over. He's not by the Duchen anymore. He's not anything. That's okay. That's Nira B'divrei Pri Begadim. It says here in the footnote for the Pri Begadim, it comes out She'ena over Baal Tosef, that he's not over in Baal Tosef. There's also raid, and maybe we'll get to look at it over here in the Biur Halacha, that is the problem of Baal Tosef only when you're in the middle of Birchas Kohanim. If you do it with the outstretched hands and the open fingers, maybe then it's a problem of Baal Tosef. But if it's Bechalal not in the format of Baal Tosef, of Birchas Kohanim, so then how could it be Baal Tosef? Let's finish Mishnah Berurah's Katan Kuf Dalet. V'dafka lohisif pasuk acher aser. But the whole problem if you're Baal Tosef, says the Chavetz Chaim, is only to add on other psukim or other brachas to Birchas Kohanim. Aval loymar Birchas Kohanim kama pa'amim, but to do duchening many times. Somebody wants to duchen by the 6 o'clock minyan, the 7 o'clock minyan, the 9 o'clock minyan, and the 11 o'clock minyan. Somebody wants to do that, that's not Baal Tosef. The loy shaykh Baal Tosef ba'asiyas ha-mitzvah shtei pa'amim. Doing the mitzvah many times is not Baal Tosef. And I'll give you a very simple example of this. On Rosh Hashanah, we blow 100 kailos. The requirement of Tkiyah Shofar is not 100 kailos. So what are we doing blowing 100 kailos? So we blow 100 kailos because we're makpid, shvarim trua. Then you have people who blow even more kailos because the shvarims are they tutus, tutus, whatever they are. So they blow a lot of kailos. That's not Baal Tosef. If you want to take a lulav and esrog several times during the day, that's not Baal Tosef. You're allowed to do the mitzvah many times. Baal Tosef is to add on to the mitzvah. You add on a bracha to Birchas Kohanim. You add on a parsha to the parshas of Tefillin. You add on another species to the Daled Minim. That's Baal Tosef. But to repeat the mitzvah, that is not Baal Tosef. Ois Katan Kufei. First wide line in the Mishnah Berurah here on Zayin Amud Aleph. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'im Hoisef. If the Kohen does add a bracha to Birchas Kohanim, then he's over on Baal Tosef. Says the Chavetz Chaim, the opposite is also true. If the Kohen takes out one of the brachas, over mishum Baal Tigra, then he's over on the opposite lav, the other loisaseh, which is you're not allowed to take off of a mitzvah. You can't put on tefillin that only have 3 parshas in them. You can't say, oh, well, at least I'll be yotze those 3 parshas. No, you're not allowed to wear tefillin with 3 parshas. That would be Baal Tigara. You're detracting, you're taking away from a mitzvah. To take a lulav and esrog, without the hadassim and aravas, you can't do that. That's Baal Tigra. So to over here, to say the Birchas Kohanim, but to leave out some of the brachas, or one of the brachas, or some say one word, that's Baal Tigra. So Kohen has to be very careful that when he goes up to duchen, he has to make sure that he says every word. And he says every word in the proper format with the outstretched arms and hands, and he does it b'koil rum, in a loud voice, etc., etc. Now let's take a look here at what I found to be a very interesting biur halacha. Says the Chavetz Chaim in the biur halacha dibra maschel ve'im hoisef. Says the Chavetz Chaim, l'chayra nira, it would seem, the dafke im gam zeh hoya b'prisas kapayim, that this iser of Baal Tosef is only if you add on the bracha in the proper format of Birchas Kohanim. B'prisas kapayim, outstretched hands, ukahai gavna, and similarly, kol hadvarim, all of the requirements, hama'akvin b'nesias kapayim, that would otherwise prevent you from being mekayim the mitzvah Birchas Kohanim. U'kamoshe kasavnu la'el b'Mishnah Berurah b'sif yadalad sif katan nun. All of the requirements that you need for Birchas Kohanim, the outstretched arms, the open hands, to say it b'kol rum, all of the requirements that we have for Birchas Kohanim. Only then, it's only if you add a bracha to Birchas Kohanim in that fashion, zeh mikri haisafa al ha-mitzvah, that would constitute adding on to the mitzvah, and that would constitute being over Baal Tosef. But if a Kohen gives another Yid a bracha, not in the midst of Birchas Kohanim, or he's not standing in front of the tzibbur, facing the tzibbur, ukahai gavna, or any of these other things where he's not fulfilling the requirements of Birchas Kohanim, zeh in mikri haisafa. That doesn't constitute adding on to Birchas Kohanim. Ki im bracha ba'alma. That's just a Kohen giving a Yid a bracha. So, again, for example, the Kohen comes down off the duchen, and you tell him Shkoyach Kohen, and he says Baruch Tiyeh, right? That doesn't constitute an addition to Birchas Kohanim. Birchas Kohanim is seen, signed, sealed, and delivered. That's over. But if he's standing up by the duchen, and he still's got his hands outstretched, and his fingers opened, and the talus over his face, and everything else, and he just finished saying, Shalom, Baruch Tiyeh, that's a problem. Then you're adding on to Birchas Kohanim. V'chein kosa b'shulchan aruch hagraz ayin sham. V'chein muchach b'chedushay Rashba sukkah lamed aleph. And from the Ritva over there, the Dafka b'prisis kapayim, that this problem of Baal Tosef is only in the format of Birchas Kohanim with the outstretched hands, ayin sham. Umistama hu adin shari dvarim hama'akvid minasiyas kapayim. The Mishnah. So too all the other requirements of Birchas Kohanim. You're only over Baal Tosef if you have all of those factors. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, midivrei Rambam mashma shaloi kedivrayim. From a Rambam, it's mashma not like these Rishonim. Sharei Kosa bePerak Yudalid Hilchos Tefillah Din Yud Beis. The Rambam writes in Perak Yudalid Hilchos Tefillah Halacha Yud Beis V'zelu Shoinai, and this is a quote from his words: Ein HaKohanim Rashoyin B'chol Mokoim LaHosif Bracha Al Shloishes HaPsukim. The Kohanim are never allowed to add on a bracha B'chol Mokoim, in any place. They're not allowed to add on to a bracha onto the 3 psukim of Birchas Kohanim. Kigoyin Hashem Elikav Yisechem Yosef Aleichem V'kiyotzeba Loi B'kol Ram. They're not allowed to add on another bracha in a loud voice, V'loi B'lachash, and not in a quiet voice. Shenemar, because it says Loi Soisifu Al Hadavar, because to do so would be to be over Baal Tosef. Ad kan l'shoinai. That's the end of the quote from the Rambam. Now, harei l'didei. So you see that according to the Rambam, over al Baal Tosef, the Kohen is over on Baal Tosef if he adds another bracha to Birchas Kohanim, kishemevarech balachash. Even if he says that additional bracha quietly. Afal gav de kol rum hu le'ikuva. Even though a loud voice is one of the requirements of Birchas Kohanim. We learned that if you have an elderly Kohen who cannot raise his voice, he can't duchen. A Kohen cannot go up to duchen and whisper. That's not, he's not Yotzei Birchas Kohanim, he's not allowed to do it. Better he should go out. So, yet the Rambam says that if the Kohanim add a bracha to Birchas Kohanim in a whisper, balachash, they're over Baal Tosef. So it seems from the Rambam, says the Chavetz Chaim, that you don't need all of the requirements of Birchas Kohanim in order to be over on Baal Tosef. K'moshe kasav neleil Mishnah Berurah Sif Yudalid. Umistama delididei hu adin b'loi prisis kapayim ukahai gav the gam kein over. And the Bir Halacha ends with a tzarich iyun. He says tzarich iyun. I don't know what to tell you. Now, interestingly enough, I see I put it away, but my trusty Aruch HaShulchan, I took a look in the Aruch HaShulchan, and the Aruch HaShulchan says beferish that nowadays the Kohanim come down off the duchen and you say Shkoyach Kohen, and the Kohanim say Baruch Tihya. So if anybody's worried about that, we definitely have a psak from the Aruch HaShulchan that it is fine. There are others. There was a Shaila Tshuva Sefer. Might have it here in the Dirshu actually. It might be brought down here previously in the Dirshu. Let me see quickly. Shaila Tzhuva's Har Tzvi. The Shaila Tzhuva's Har Tzvi says that the Kohanim should not say Baruch Tiyah, because for the Kohanim to say Baruch Tiyah would be Baal Tosef. It's interesting. I have an uncle who's a Kohen, and he's very makbid. The only bracha that he ever gives to anybody under any circumstances. Now he's a very, very elderly man, and he still likes to give out brachas. And the only brachas that he ever gives anybody is Yivarecha Hashem Yishbarecha Yar Hashem Panav Elecha V'Chuneka Yisa Hashem Panav Elecha V'Yosef L'Chashalom. He says, I'm a Kohen, and that's the bracha that the Torah says a Kohen gives, so that's the bracha that I give. Okay, let's move on to Sif Chaf Ches. 3 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch here on Zayin Amud Aleph, middle of the line. Sif Chaf Ches says the Mechaber, Kohen shenosa kapov, a Kohen who duchend, v'achar kach halach lebeis hakneses acher, and now he goes to another shul. So this Kohen davened by the 7 o'clock minyan Yom Tov morning. He duchend. Now he finished duchening, and he's going to another shul to catch a daf yomi shir after davening. And he walks in and he finds a minyan that's up to duchening. So v'achar kach halach lebeis hakneses acher, u'matzah tzibbur shelo higiu leBirchas Kohanim. They're not yet by duchening. They're almost up to duchening. Yachal Lisa es kapov pamacheres. He could go ahead and duchen again. There's nothing wrong with duchening twice. That's what we said. That's not bal tosef. That's doing a mitzvah another time. Nothing wrong with that. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting kovav. A long Mishnah Berurah over here. Yachal Lisa es kapov. He's allowed to duchen again. Canal, like we saw earlier, the leka bal tosef pasiyas hamitzvah shtei pamim, because this is what we just learned previously. You're not over bal tosef if you do a mitzvah another time. That's not a problem with bal tosef. Umikam makom, nevertheless, chiyuva leka alav. He doesn't have a chiyuv to duchen again. He was already mekayim his chiyuv to duchen. He duchened already today. He doesn't have to duchen again. So b'kamakim chiyuva leka alav kevich akvar nasa kapov b'yom zeh. Since he already did Birchas Kohanim today, he's not mechuyev to do it again. The chaniska le'el b'sif gimel, like we learned in Sif Gimel. Now, I want to point out an interesting Sharat Tzion over here. Sharat Tzion ois cotton pei aleph. Says the Chavetz Chaim, va'afilu ba'oisai tzibbur gufa, even in one minyan, a kohen is not mechuyev to duchen twice. Now, for us chutzniks, what's the hechetimtza in one minyan to duchen twice? The answer is very simple. Va'afilu ba'oisai tzibbur gufa shenaisa kapayim b'shachris u'musif b'shabbos v'yomtiv. Let's say you're in Eretz Yisrael, and they duchen by shachris and they duchen by musif. You're not mechuyev to duchen twice. The kohen is only mechuyev to duchen once. He doesn't have a daraisa to kechiv to go up each time. If he does go up each time, he has to make a bracha each time. Nobody argues on that. Now let's go back into the Mishnah Berurah. We're in Ois Katan Kovav, and we're up to Va'ayin Le'el. In my Mishnah Berurah, it's 1, 2, 3. It's 3 lines down. 1, 2, 3. 3 lines down in the wide lines of the Mishnah Berurah near the beginning of the line. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'ayin le'el b'Mishnah Berurah sif katan yud aleph. Look earlier in this Siman in Mishnah Berurah ois katan yud aleph. Da'af agav de'enu mechuyev lisa kapav kama pa'amim b'yom echad. Even though a kohen certainly is not mechuyev to duchen more than once a day, Mikamakim, nevertheless, kol pam shenoise kapav, each time that he does duchen, hu mevarech asher kiddishanu b'kedushasei shel Aaron v'tzivanu levarech es Amo Yisrael ba'ava. What's the Chavetz Chaim bavarning? What's he pointing out? What he's pointing out is, if I'm telling you that the kohen is not mechuyev to duchen more than once, then maybe the second time that he duchens, he shouldn't make a bracha. How could he say v'tzivanu? I'm not commanded to do it again. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, you do make a bracha each time. The truth is, what is this very similar to? A woman who's mekayim a mitzvah shazman grama. If a woman is mekayim a mitzvah shazman grama, a woman takes daled minim, she makes a bracha. Why does she make a bracha? How could she say asher kiddishanu b'mitzvah v'tzivanu? She's not mitzvah. So we've learned over the years different pshatim. This is all based on a Rabbeinu Tam, but there's different pshatim. One pshat is that Vitzivanu doesn't go on me personally. Vitzivanu goes on Klal Yisrael. A woman can make a bracha and she could say, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvah Vitzivanu on the Tilas Lulav. She's thanking the Rabbeinu Shalom for giving the mitzvah of the Tilas Lulav to Klal Yisrael as a whole. Kedushas Yisrael. A woman is also part of Am Yisrael, and Am Yisrael is what Am Yisrael is because they have the mitzvahs of the Torah Kedusha. So a woman could definitely give Shavach Vaydah to the Rabbeinu Shalom, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvah Vitzivanu. There are other pshatim as well, but in any case, the Chavetz Chaim is pointing out that the kohen who duchens the second time does make a bracha the second time. Now we have a very interesting halacha over here. And it's interesting. I like the example of this halacha in the Mishnah Berurah because this halacha is going to be an eye-opener to a lot of people, but at the same time that it's an eye-opener, and it might take people by surprise, the truth is, if you take a step back and you think about it objectively, you really should come to the same conclusion as the Chavetz Chaim. It just, at first glance, it sounds strange. Let's take a look what the Chavetz Chaim says here. Kohen hamispal Shemoneh Esrei. A kohen who is davening along the Shemoneh Esrei by Musaf, right? Pretty intense, Musaf on Yom Tov. There's a lot there that's worth saying slowly. So the Kohen is davening Alang Shemoneh Esrei by Musaf. Kohen is Mispal Shemoneh Esrei. And now, he's still in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei when they get up to Duchening. So they get up to Duchening, Koyanim. Okay, this guy's in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Im ein sham Kohen acher bebeis hakneses, if there's no other Kohen available to Duchen, tzarech lahafsik v'lalis l'duchen. He has to interrupt the Shemoneh Esrei, and he has to go up, and he has to Duchen. Kedei sheloi tispatel on the siyas kapayim, so that the siyas kapayim shouldn't become bottled. Now, I think many people would look at this halacha, and they would say, wow, you're not mafsik in Shemoneh Esrei for Rabbeinu Yesh Be'Rabba. You're not mafsik in Shemoneh Esrei for Baruch Hu. You're not mafsik in Shemoneh Esrei for Kedusha. All the things that were mafsik in Pesukei de Zimra, in this, in Ben HaProkim, in Shemoneh Esrei, in Kriya Shema. Well, we're not mafsik in Shemoneh Esrei. Shemoneh Esrei, afilu nochash karich alav. There's a snake that's winding its way around you. You're not mafsik in Shemoneh Esrei. But the Kohen is in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei. They get up to Duchening. He's mafsik in Shemoneh Esrei. Not only he's mafsik in Shemoneh Esrei, he steps out of his Shemoneh Esrei. He's got to go up to the Aron, to the Duchen. He's got to wash his hands. He's got to turn around. He's got to do the whole thing. Sounds very surprising. Afterwards, he goes back and he has to finish off his davening. So the truth is that if you take a step back and you think about it objectively, it's not a pel at all. Birchas Kohanim is a daraisa. So Birchas Kohanim is a mitzvah say daraisa. Davening Shemoneh Esrei is drabanan. Even according to the Shitas HaRishonim, that davening is a daraisa. Shitas HaRambam, davening is daraisa. Shemoneh Esrei is not daraisa. Shemoneh Esrei is a matbeya shetavu chachamim. It's a matbeya that the Anshe Knesset Agdola gave us to be mekayim the mitzvah of davening. They gave us Shemoneh Esrei, but that's a derabanan. The seder atfil is a derabanan. It's not a daraisa. So now, if you think about it that way, I'm a kohen. It's time for duchening. So there's a mitzvah say daraisa that I have to be mekayim. How could I let the derabanan of Shemoneh Esrei stand in my way? Of course, I have to go up to the duchen and I have to duchen. If you think about it that way, suddenly it becomes yeah. So it's an eye-opener because you have to realize that when a shaila comes up, how you have to look at a shaila and you have to take a step back and you have to break it down to the fundamentals. Once you think about it according to the fundamentals, it's a mitzvah say daraisa that's coming up against the derabanan. Of course I got to step out of Shemoneh Esrei and I got to go do it. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says over here, "Va'achar sheyigmar nesiyas kapayim yered ma'aduchen v'yigmar tfilasei." At the end of duchen, he goes back to Shemoneh Esrei. I find it interesting that the Chavetz Chaim chose not to be meirich a little bit over here, or at least maybe in a biur halacha or in a shar tzion, because the halacha that he should go back to his Shemoneh Esrei is an interesting one. It depends how long his hafsaka was. L'chayra, if he was mafsik in his Shemoneh Esrei long enough that it kadesh yigmar's kula, long enough that he could have finished the entire Shemoneh Esrei, well, in that case, it would seem not to be so pashut. I took a picture of a quote from a sefer over here. I'm just looking for it on my phone. It would seem not to be so pashut. Let me see where. Oh, that's not. Yeah, he brings down from a Radvaz, the cause of a Radvaz, Shem Shah beBirchas Kohanim Kishir Zman Shel Kedei Ligmar Skula. If the hefsik that the Kohen was mafsik in the Shemoneh Esrei was long enough that he could have recited the entire Shemoneh Esrei during that break, Chayzel Rosh HaTfilah, then he has to start Shemoneh Esrei over again. Kifi Shenifsak B'Simin Kov Daled Sif Hey. V'im Lav, if the hefsik wasn't that long, Chayzel Rosh HaBracha, then he has to go back to the beginning of the bracha that he was mafsik in, Kimavur Sham. That's the Radvaz. Avala Pri Begadim Kasav She'enei Hefsik. It's an interesting Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim says no. I don't care how long the hefsek was. I don't care how long duchening took. He still could go back to Shemoneh Esrei and continue from the beginning of the bracha that he was mafsikin. Why? Because he says the duchening does not constitute a hefsek in Shemoneh Esrei. Shenesias kapayim hu me'ein hatfila. Because what's he being mafsik for? He's being mafsik for Birchas Kohanim. Birchas Kohanim is part and parcel of davening, so it doesn't constitute a hefsek in the Shemoneh Esrei. Okay, I found that very interesting. Let's continue here in the Mishnah Berurah Katan Kuvav, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down in the wide lines near the end of the line. So, the halakha that we just learned was the Kohen is davening alag Shemoneh Esrei. He's in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei when it comes time for duchening. Said the Mishnah Berurah that the Kohen should be mafsik in his Shemoneh Esrei and he should go up to duchen. That's only if there's no other Kohen available to perform the duchening. Now, the truth is, by the way, I should mention that this, again, is not such a big chiddush because it's very similar to another halacha that we already learned. And that's the halacha of the chazan who's a Kohen. What did we say about the chazan? Remember, the chazan who's davening chazaras hashatz is davening Shemoneh Esrei. He's in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei. What did we learn about a Kohen who's the chazan? We learned that if the chazan is a Kohen and there's no other Kohen available to duchen, so then what does the chazan do? He walks away from the amid, he goes up to the duchen and he duchens. So he's also interrupting his Shemoneh Esrei to go duchen, right? Same thing. Why? Because he's a Kohen, it's a daraisa, he has to go duchen. Now continues the Mishnah Berurah, and he says, "V'im yesh sham Kohen acher," but if there is another Kohen available to duchen, then einoi poisik mitfilasai. Then this Kohen is in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, should not be mafsik in his Shemoneh Esrei. Im loy she'amru loi alei l'duchen oi toil yodecha. Unless somebody came over to him and whispered in his ear, "Hey Kohen, you got to go duchen." Oh, if somebody told him to go duchen, so that's already amar lahem. He was instructed to duchen. If he was instructed to duchen, now he mamish has a chiyuv asay daraisa. He's got to go duchen. He has no choice. Even if there is another Kohen. If there's no other Kohen and nobody told him to go duchen, so okay, he could say that the instruction to duchen, when the chazan called out, Kohanim, he wasn't talking to me, I'm in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei. He was talking to the Kohanim that are available. So I could squeak out of it and I could say that the chiyuv daraisa wasn't chal on me. If there's no other Kohen, then it must have been chal on me. I'm the only Kohen in the house. But if there are other Kohanim and I'm in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, then when the chazan called out Kohanim, it's not to me. So I could squeak out of it. I could say I don't have a chiyuv daraisa. But if somebody taps me on the shoulder, of course it's a well-meaning individual. It's always well-meaning individuals. If a well-meaning individual comes and taps the Kohen on the shoulder and says, "Hey fella, I know you're in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, but you got to go duchen." Now I'm stuck. Now the chiyuv asay daraisa is chal on you. Now you got to go duchen, even if there are 30 other Kohanim. So that's what the Mishnah Berurah says here. Daz afilu yesham kanim acherim tzarich lahafsik v'lalois. Now he has to go up, and in the Sharet Zion, the Chavetz Chaim says over here, and that's true, even if he thinks he's not going to be able to go back and properly continue his Shemoneh Esrei because he's going to get mavubal. Doesn't matter. That's all the Rabbanans. The chiyuv to duchen is now a daraisa on you. You're stuck. Says the Mishnah Berurah, if you're in a situation where you have to be mafsik in your Shemoneh Esrei to go duchen, so then remember, you have to be nekar mim kaimai during the bracha of ritzei. When you hear the chazan get up to ritzei, you have to take a step towards the duchen in middle of your Shemoneh Esrei. If you don't, then you can't duchen because you weren't nekar mim kaimai during ritzei. Okay, now the Chavetz Chaim says, all of that being as it may, says the Chavetz Chaim, ha'elia rabba mefakfek be'ikar heter zeh shel hefsik be'emtza tefila afilu ba'amru loy alei. The Elia Rabbah is mefakfek on this halacha. The Elia Rabbah says, not only do I not want the Kohen to be mafsik in Shemoneh Esrei to go duchen, if there's no other Kohen, if nobody said anything to him, I don't even want him to be mafsik if somebody told him, go up and go duchen. The Afal gav the tefillah d'Rabbanan he, because the Eliyah Rabbah says even though davening is only a din d'Rabbanan and duchening is a din d'Oraisa, mikam makom efshir dehamidu chachamim devreim afilu mimkaim aseh. He says we know that there's a rule that the chachamim hamidu devreim. The chachamim stood by their words even in the place of an aseh d'Oraisa, as long as what you're doing is b'sheva al taisa. You're not doing something against the Torah. You're just standing in your place, and you're not going to be Mekayim and Aseh. So yes, the Eliyah Rabbah says, there are times when you stick to a D'Rabbanan. So Tefillah Shemoneh Esrei is a D'Rabbanan, and you stand there and you do the D'Rabbanan, and you don't get up and be Mekayim and Mitzvah Aseh D'Oraisa. V'chein dasa goyin yavitz b'siduroi, and so says Rabbi Yaakov Emden in his siddur, shaloi lahafsik be'emtza tefillah nesiyas kapayim ki sha'omid b'bracha acheres, that you don't interrupt your Shemoneh Esrei to go duchen, im lo shehigia b'tfilasei l'mekayim Birchas Kohanim. Unless, Rabbi Yaakov Emden says, if you're a Kohen and you're davening Shemoneh Esrei, and you happen to be up to HaTorah shimcha u'lecha noel l'hoidos, now you could go duchen. Because why not? That's the place for Birchas Kohanim and Shemoneh Esrei. It's mamish tana hefsek. Shaz daita shemuta lalaka ragla v'lalos l'duchen shemamakom zel mikri hefsek shumei ein sim shalom. V'hinei kishabishar b'sakat tefillah sheyagia oz leiz hamakom b'shav v'mashrech tzibbur. Chavetz Chaim says, if you're going to do like Rabbi Yaakov Emden, if you're davening, if you're a Kohen, you're davening, you're still Shemoneh Esrei or Musaf on Yom Tov, and you realize that you're going to get up to HaTorah shimcha l'cha noel l'hoidos in time for duchening, you have to make sure to be nekar bim kaimai during the bracha of Ritzei. And of course, this is all only, says the Rabbi Yaakov Emden, if you're convinced that you're going to be able to properly continue your Shemoneh Esrei afterwards. It's interesting that the Aruch HaShulchan writes as a davar pashut that a Kohen, if he's the only Kohen in the room and he's in the middle of his Shemoneh Esrei and to get up to duchening, the Aruch HaShulchan says he should be mafsik, he should go up to the duchen, and he should duchen. Okay, let's go a little bit weiter. Let's do Sifchav Tes. Second line off the bottom, last word on the line in the Shulchan Aruch, says the Mechaber, Kohen shaloi hispalel adayin, a Kohen who has not yet daven Shacharis, umatzat tzibbur mispalelin. So, fellow is going to daven by the 9 o'clock minyan. Very, very good fellow. He likes to come early to davening. So he walks in by the end of the 7 o'clock minyan. And the 7 o'clock minyan is up to duchening. So this Kohen, Mr. Katz, he didn't daven yet, but he just walked in to a minyan that's holding by duchening. Could he duchen? Says the Mechaber, Kohen shaloi yispal adayin umatzat tzibur mispalelin, noisei kapov. He could go duchen. Ve'ena tefillah ma'akavtoi. The fact that he didn't daven yet is not ma'akiv him from going and duchening. He could go duchen. Says the Mishnah Berurah, bottom line, oiskat and kovzayin, noisei kapov, he could go duchen. Ve'im roya shekishayala l'duchen, yavar zman tefillah. Interesting case. This guy walked in to daven by a 9:30 minyan, and he walked in at the end of the 7:30 minyan, and he could go duchen, but if he goes and he duchens, he's going to miss Zman Tefillah. So what's better? Should he go duchen, or should he stick to Zman Tefillah? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Yelech lachatzar beis hakneses v'yispal sham. Go out to the lobby and daven and get Zman Tefillah. Don't be in the shul when they say Ritzei. Get out and go daven. Avalim amru loy kaidim Ritzei alei. But if somebody told him, hey, you're a Kohen, go duchen, tzarich lalos, because now he's got the mitzvah say daraisa. Dim lo yala over ba say daraisa. V'dachi tefillah d'Rabbanan. Another case. V'im lo kar kriyishma. Let's say this guy walked in, and it's a minute and a half to Zman Kriyishma, and they want him to go duchen. But if he duchens, he's going to miss Zman Kriyishma. V'roy shekish yalu duchen yav Zman Kriyishma. Mishnah Berurah says, go out to the hallway and say Kriya Shema. But if it's before Ritzei and somebody told you go duchen, mitzvah say daraisa. But here you have two daraisas against each other. Zman Kriya Shema is a daraisa. So on the one hand, he's up against Zman Kriya Shema. He's got to say Kriya Shema before Zman Kriya Shema, daraisa. On the other hand, somebody just told him go duchen. It's a mitzvah say daraisa. He's got to go duchen. So now the Mishnah Berurah says Yikra Pasuk Rishon. So you should say the first pasuk of Kriya Shema, which means Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Elolam V'ed. And according to some shittas, then you're already yotze the daraisa. V'yalav Yisakapov, and then he should go up and he should duchen. Okay, we're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time Yitz Hashem with Sif Lamed. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discuss of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rabbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua's Parnasa Shuduchim to all those in need. And we should be zoiche to see the Bias called Tzedek and the Birchas Kohanim in the Beis Hamikdash. It should be built Meher V'Yameinu. Amen. Be well.